In a great little interview.
Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show. Serendipity reigns supreme here in the land of enchantment. Just did a great interview with Stephanie Hatfield, a great singer-songwriter in her own right. I get a chance to interview now her husband and the head of Frogville Studios. What an honor. Bill Palmer, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you, Jake.
I just want you to talk to cats out there who maybe have a premonition or a desire to do something to promote authentic music, record authentic music. Mm-hmm. How did you wind up with Frogville Studios?
Well, I was just in a band. I was a working musician, and we were in Santa Fe for the summer playing a residency gig here because we loved the weather. We were based out of Austin, Texas. It was hot, and we liked being up here, and we were hitting Colorado in this area. And Big John Treadwell, a friend of mine, kind of fell in love with our band and offered for us to make a record. And he said, "I'll finance the record. Where should we do it?" And I thought about some of the local studios, and I just wasn't that hip to them. And I was like, "Well, why don't we borrow and rent some gear and put it in your living room up on the hill?" And he said, "Well, do you know how to run that stuff?" And I said, "No, but I'll learn." And we made this kooky little record. He had his couch in here, and we sort of scooted some furniture out and spent a couple weeks working on this record. I think a week to track it, a week to mix it. I didn't know what I was doing. Arguably still don't, but that's another conversation. But
you're flying blind on it. Yeah, but that's all right. I mean,
I was flying blind. And we made this little record and then headed back to Austin. And the local radio station picked the record up, or started playing a couple songs off of it, and I started getting calls from people here in New Mexico wanting me to come up and record an album for them. And Big John and I partnered up, and we were like, let's take a little run at this. And so he bought some gear, and I would show up from Austin for a couple weeks here and there and record some albums, and then I would go back. And the energy that we created right in the very beginning, I think, was just the right little concoction.
What was the milieu of energy that how can you break down that energy field?
Well, I mean, Big John just provided a really nice homey space here, and it was it was a little bit hippied out, and kind of it was a little cluttered, and so people would walk in and kind of not feel, everybody felt comfortable the moment they walked in the room. It's like, oh, this is where we're going to be creative. Okay, this feels good. Maybe there'd be a lava lamp over here, and we sort of had Christmas lights up around the place early on, and that just kind of always gave it a festive feel. And there would be like a cooler of beer out front, and dogs laying around and stuff, and it just had this feeling to it. And John bought some really great stuff, and I sort of just provided this comfortable thing for everybody.
I was down with Greg Arico from Sly Stone, catching a hang with him in San Francisco, and he took me to this place called Music City, San Francisco, which is in downtown. Mm-hmm. And it essentially provides, it's a boarding house for bands to get their stuff together, feel comfortable, and ultimately be able to record and play live. Mm-hmm. But they can essentially live for, I don't know, maybe share a room for $700 a month, which in San Francisco is very cheap, actually. Mm. Can you talk about how this has become a compound? People, you actually
Yes.
advocate for artists. Talk about how that has evolved.
Well, the records just kept getting better, and over time. And in 2010, Big John had some money to invest, and he built it up into a full-on international.
I don't need to talk to this cat. Where's this cat at, by the way?
He's around.
Okay,
around.
yeah, I need to talk to that cat.
And built it up, and I was living here full-time at this point, and we really opened it up into, and he moved out into another house up on the hill, and we really opened it up into a full facility. And the idea was that Santa Fe is a very desirable place to be. And there's no music industry here, so we couldn't just build it up thinking we were going to survive on what was going on here. And so we knew that we wanted for it to be a destination location. Santa Fe is a cool enough town, but people aren't going to get very distracted here.
That's right.
And so usually, bands will come in from the Bay Area or wherever, and people will always ask me, "Hey, where's the best party in town?" And I say, You're looking at it.
Frogville.
This is it.
Freaking Frogville.
It's us, right
I
here,
love
right
it, man. Let's just do something. Can you, two dear friends of the Jake Feinberg Show are Brian Haas and Matt Chamberlain. I've
Yes.
been able to catch a couple of hangs with them. Can we go into the studio and show us around there?
Let's do.
Let's do it. All right.
Come with me.
You're live.
I'll give you the nickel tour.
Because I think people need to know that this is how music will continue to, the salvation of music will continue.
So this is the upstairs, and there's an apartment up there, so bands can be living here while they're working.
Do they have to pay rent, or is there?
No, it's just part of the day rate thing.
And this is where Prometheus Risen went down with Chamberlain and Haas.
Yes, this is it.
So take us through the studio here and how you built it
Well,
up.
this is the big tracking room, and the idea here, I knew that I wanted a large space to be able to record in with high ceilings. We have these beautiful vigas here, and originally it was just these sort of stucco walls, and John and I were talking about how do we, kind of deaden them to get some acoustic treatment. And that stuff is so expensive, and I was like, well, John, you're an artist. Why don't you just hang your art on the walls, and that will do the trick.
The pad.
And it did. And so what you have in here is this big, nice, open-sounding room. So I can move microphones around into different parts of the room and really get these nice, big tones, kind of classic-type tones, without too much bouncing around of sound. So everything gets absorbed. We've got these old pianos and stuff around here. Just weird things we've kind of collected.
Frogville.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, and so, with that Brian Haas Chamberlain record, Matt had his drum set up over here, had his little world over here. And Brian, the best I remember, we took the little grand piano and we turned it around and had it kind of facing Matt.
Matt had his own kit in there and his own world.
He had his own little world, and Brian had like some synths and some bass stuff up here that I was wired into, and then I also mic'd up the piano, and then I took like these kind of packing blankets and sort of draped them over the piano to kind of create a little bit of isolation, but not too much. And so anytime you're on that record, when you're hearing piano and there's drums, you're really hearing the drums coming through the piano, and you're hearing the piano coming through the drums. It's like the Rolling Stones said, let it bleed.
But by the way, a dear friend of the program, Rob Kidd, just tuned in. You know Rob?
Oh, I know.
Why don't you tell about Rob? Because what a badass drummer he is.
Rob Kidd is a bad motherfucker. And we just worked.
Has he been to Frogville?
Yes, we worked on the Pike and Sutton record back in January.
Wow.
And Rob brought all these weird, cool things. I mean, it was really
because he's part of the orchestra. He's just expand. So how is that different? When you say classic tones, to the layperson out there, what does that mean?
Well, I mean real sounds that utilize real space and acoustic situations, classic tones.
As opposed to, but you still have people plug in. I mean, people are, so it's not totally acoustic.
No. But I just mean, talking about like drums or vocals or anything where I can utilize the room space to get more kind of a vibe that ties things together. So, it's not that I don't like electronic kind of sounds too. I love that stuff as well. But what my specialty is here is putting human beings in a room together, playing music at the same time, oftentimes bleeding into each other. And a lot of times I'll have a full band in here and I'll have the vocalist in the room too. And because if I get a good sound on a vocal, if the drums are coming through it, they're going to sound good too, coming through that same mic. And it glues things together that way. And there's something about when human beings play music at the same time that I'm always trying to capture. Not to say that we don't overdub or we don't do these other things. We do, and that's all fine too. Great things come of that. But there is definitely kind of an undefinable sound that happens when human beings are in a room. It's like two people dancing together.
Rob Kidd chiming in, having a ball. Bill, talk about the fact that you're not opposed to some leakage.
Oh, I love leakage.
Explain, because most people are. I've talked to people; they're petrified of it.
They're petrified of it.
All right, and why? What? Talk about the prescience and how leakage even if the drums leak into how it can make the music transcend completely. Or just from your point of view, riff on leakage. I mean, why it's positive.
Because there's a glue that happens that connects things. It's like, it's like ties the room together kind of a thing. It's like there's a certain thing that happens. I remember when it first hit me, because I used to try to really separate things. And there was this record years ago, Ryan Adams' record called Heartbreaker. And Ethan Johns, Glenn Johns' son, produced that record. And Gillian Welch and David Rawlings were the band. And I remember reading an article about that, and someone asked Ethan Johns, how did you get that badass drum tone on that record? And he said, it was coming through Ryan's vocal mic. And it was like a light went on in my brain.
I do. Well, this is so important. I mean, I hope people are, if they have aspirations to put together a studio, I hope they're listening to this right now.
I think one thing is that when you're making records is like making breakfast. Steve Earle said this one time, and I lived by this. The chicken contributes, but the pig commits.
You got to break that down.
You got to be the pig. You got to commit. There's a fearlessness that happens in the process of making a record. And so for me, from the engineer perspective or producer perspective, part of that fearlessness is being fearless that one musician is going to ruin another musician's take. You put these people in a room together and they work together or they don't. And there's not a lot I can do one way or the other. So I tend to try to and want to work with people who work well together in that situation. And the magic happens because people are also put on the spot. If the guitarist knows that his amp is blasting over into the floor tom mic, he's more likely to play with a little more conviction than if he's like somehow disconnected from the rest of the people.
Just for just to put a flyer out there. I mean, is there? We're talking about so many heavy cats, but there's an aesthetic to the people that you bring in here. Is there a bar that people? Are you willing to take on anybody? Is anybody welcome at Frogville?
Yes.
Yes. So, can you explain maybe as in your career when somebody who is, I've interviewed Dan Healy from the Grateful Dead, the engineer, 5 times, and there was a certain point where he had to tell Garcia, "You play, I mix." Mm-hmm. Okay. I assume you've gotten in here with musicians who want to tell you how to mix. Mm-hmm. How have you been able to diffuse, stay secure with yourself, and get that person to buy into what you're doing? If you give an example, maybe.
A little bit of everything happens. Sometimes, depending on the project, I completely give in. Sometimes I put my foot down. Sometimes, as we say, I'll go to the mat for something.
Because you're going to have to listen to that for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm. There's that, but I also I'm not a very stubborn person, and so usually if someone has some sort of a creative idea, I'm interested in it because to me that's how I am able to move into new territory, and that's how I learn new ways of doing things.
Can you give an example?
God, man, it happens. It really happens all the time. Honestly. I worked with a producer years ago, this guy named Andy Kravitz, and we were actually working on my band's record. He was producing, and I was sort of engineering and helping out, and I wanted to hear this high, like organ note, like a Hammond organ note, just one note soaring over this whole chorus of this song. And he was over there at the board working, and I was like, "Hey, man, can we put this thing in there?" And he said, "Sure, go set up a mic, So I was over there, and I had my the Neumann U87, and I was putting my ear up against the speaker, and and I was getting the sound, and I feel this sort of presence looming over my shoulder. And I turn around and look, and he's standing behind me, and he says, "What the fuck are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm setting up a mic, man, for playing this part." He says, "Watch this." And he walks over to the snare drum, and he pulls the 57 off of the snare drum and throws it across the room. It hits the wall, falls on the floor behind the Hammond, and he says, "Okay, play your part." And that was a life-changing
and you had experience. and it hit exactly the way you wanted it to.
Yes. Before that moment, I thought things had to be a certain way, and it things like that. When people do things like that, I'm very receptive to those things because they teach me something valuable. And I trust, and it's like at this point my ears are good enough and I've done it long enough. If something sucks, I might even, if they say, let's do this, and I know it sucks, I might try to massage the situation in a way to where it works for everyone.
Dear friend of mine, a guy that you must have crossed paths with in Austin. Have you worked with Papa Molly?
I have not worked with Papa Molly yet.
But you knew him in Austin?
I've seen Papa Molly play many times.
Can you talk about his presence? I'm going to go see him next week in New Orleans, but just...
It's been many years. It's been many years. But Papa Molly just kind of had this sort of, when I used to see him play, just this energy of like boss, of control and confidence.
Oh, yeah.
And I see that, to me, when I see that in musicians, it's just like fearlessness.
You're describing the Jake Feinberg show right now. It's
exactly,
it's
man.
Straight ahead,
exactly.
man.
So I love that. I love that about Papa Molly.
What if you like as all the greatest musicians are all omnivores. I mean, they're all searching for new territory. But and you are a decorated multi-instrumentalist and musician in your own right. But from Frogville point of view, where do you what's the new territory you want to go into? What are you looking to? How do you want this place to continue to grow?
Well, I mean, obviously, the main thing in this sort of era of music industry, the whole thing is changing. I mean, people aren't buying CDs anymore. People aren't even really downloading anymore. So it's just a whole other thing than it has been before. For me, though, the craft and the art of making music in like kind of a really serious way is something that is just not going to go away. And so I like participating in that. I like being a part of that going forward. The main thing is just in this climate, in these times, is just people from other places is like, hey man, come to Santa Fe. This is like an ancient city in the middle of the American Southwest. We have the most beautiful views. And I don't know if at some point you can get a shot, but we're up on top of a hill here looking over the city. And I mean, it is like...
Well, before we wrap up, we're going to show Brian Haas's house over there.
It's creme de la creme.
It is. So, I mean, the reputation is word of mouth. Mm-hmm. Other musicians they come here, they say it's a great hang. You're going to get some great... I mean, Taj Mahal's come here?
Mm-hmm. Taj was here.
Who else has come in? Who else has rolled in here?
God, man, so many people, I've worked with Popper. I made this weird little record with Val Kilmer some years ago.
That's filthy.
Johnny Gimble, who played with...
Dude, the sickest fiddle player ever.
Played with
Gimble?
Bob Wills in the Texas Playboys.
Is he still with us? Is he still in this earth?
No, he's not. No,
he left us.
He's gone, yeah. But
you had Gimble in here.
Had Gimble in here. I mean, God, just recently. I've been working with John Graboff, who's a famous pedal steel player. Just lovely, lovely person. I love working with him. But like I said, we're out here in Santa Fe. This is like the weird Wild West corner of the U.S. And so
it's pretty true. I mean, New Mexico, it's the land of enchantment, and I've been, quite honestly, just absorbing it all the way from Deming and then swinging up through Albuquerque, and then my dear friend Claudio Toulouse is like, we're having a ball yesterday, and then I come here and I'm sitting here with Bill Palmer, and you're like, yeah, Claudio just called me to come up here.
Yeah, I talked to Claudio yesterday on the phone. What a sweet guy.
Can you talk about, and maybe you don't have a lot of experience with this because you're playing live, but is there a distinction in your mic, the way you record? Have you done any live recording for bands? And how does that differ from Frogville?
Do you mean like out in the field?
I mean someone that's like, we're playing a gig and we want we want to press it on record and we want to do it live.
Yeah.
How is it different from being in Frogville?
Well, it's different in that I don't really have as much sort of interaction with the band in the process. When we're in here working, I'll walk in from the control room, I'll stand here and maybe we'll crack a beer or something, but there's this thing, hey, can I get you some coffee? Or, we'll start talking and I'll tell a story, or someone wants to go stand outside and take a break and we have a moment together. Because, my whole philosophy of recording in the studio is that many times the most important things happen when the red light isn't on, because that's what creates this little thing. And then when the red light is on, it's like, boom, okay, we just did what we have been preparing for all this time. And so there's that. Whereas in the live setting, you don't quite have that same kind of interaction. the band gets up there, I give the thumbs up. They look at me like, hope you got this, man.
Right, because
and it's off and running.
Because even if the red light's on, Rob Kidd's cooking the groove or Chamberlain, if something's not right, you can come in and dialogue
Exactly.
it. Yeah. But there, once they go, they go.
And there's something great about that. I love limitations. To me, I love them because I love working within them. I mean, pretty much the human artistic experience is based on limitations. It always has been. And where we're always going into the future is always pushing what those limitations are. But in the meantime, whatever those limitations are, you work within them and create something very realistic and pure and human. And so I love that, and that's why live records work and why people love live performances and live records is because there is no take two. It's everything in the moment.
Do you bring a lot of the nuances, like the leakage stuff, to the live component to it as well?
Yeah, you have to.
You have to.
Yeah.
I also, before we wrap, I want you to just talk. I'm from the Duke Ellington School of Music, and it's all music, and the subjective part is that it's either good or bad. Mm-hmm. I'd like you to talk about your concept of music, the idea that, and if you feel that our obsession about stratification and genres have hurt the ability for musical vocabulary to grow.
Well, I mean, you could say in one way it hurts. Anything that limits people's appreciation of music is never good.
Because you say, Chamberlain and Haas, they're playing abstract, organic, improvisational music. Some people would call that jazz. Mm-hmm. But the minute you ask somebody about that, you get 20 different definitions of what jazz is.
Right. Like one thing we deal with a lot here in New Mexico is Americana. There's so much Americana, and it really pisses people off.
I bet.
Yet these bands that I work with, who would be considered Americana by many standards, are like some of the best musicians and some of the most, beautiful,
authentic,
melodic,
burning,
authentic stuff. So, labels always are a little bit unfortunate.
But I guess more to the point, when I was talking to your wife, Stephanie, and she mentioned Nola Tet, and she mentioned, Haas and Chamberlain, and so many more people, and you started to say something about the universal language, how you're able to adapt. Yes. Can you riff on that?
Yes, I can. Basically, like when Haas and Chamberlain were in here, which is, I think, what you're getting at. Those guys have an understanding.
I just want to be clear. That's not the music that you play, right? Okay, that's not your bag. But
those guys have an understanding of music in ways that I cannot even wrap my head around. An educated understanding of music. But for me, it's like I know when something sounds good. I know when a flower is pretty or when a flower smells good. I know these things. I know when a snare drum is just right in the mix. And most importantly, particularly in the case of those two guys, even though half the time I didn't know what the hell they were doing, I could tell that their symbiosis was happening.
I dig. It's
I could feel the push and pull. I could like it was like I was watching them dancing in here, and that's something that is universal. Any style of music, you can see that, you can feel that, you know when that's happening, and if I can manage to get that on tape, my job is done.
I just want people to understand they don't have to siphon themselves off to one genre of music in their studios. It's a feel, it's a symbiosis. Mm-hmm. Let the body dance.
That's right.
Has Shannon McNally been in here?
Yes, she has.
I want you to riff. I've done a couple cosmic interviews with Shannon. Mm-hmm. You talk about working with her?
Yes. Originally, I worked with Shannon. She came in to sing on my band's record.
Really?
A song that... I was in this band called 100 Year Flood, and we had a song called Neck of the Woods. And Shannon was in town, and I think I went and played guitar with her down on the bandstand. And I was like, hey, I'll come play guitar for you if you'll come in and cut these vocal, kind of a duet thing with me on my record. And honestly, it's one of my favorite pieces of music I've ever been involved with. And a lot of it has to do with Shannon, and a lot of it was that it already was, and that's why I asked Shannon to be on it, because I knew it was a good piece of music, and I knew she would probably dig it. And then also she came in and sang on Stephanie's record. And, Shannon is one of those people, in my experience, she came in and we had this idea, here's where your place is, here are the words. And she came in and she just gave it another thing than what we expected. Yeah. And see, I love that. I can direct people all day long, but it's when something when someone's own artistic energy comes into the process, to me, that's what I'm always looking for. And Shannon was great at that.
The late great Ndugu Chancellor said music is a meal. I mean, it's not just chicken,
Right.
it's a gumbo. So when you're bringing ideas in, and especially if they're not, if it adds to that blend, that's the magic of it all.
Yeah.
Bill Palmer, live at Frogville. Brian Haas is right down the road.
Yep.
What an honor to connect, man. Thank you for being part of the program.
Thank you for interviewing me.
It's the Jake Feinberg Show. We'll be back in a little bit.